My name is Joe Keller, and I'm here I was invited here to be part of this demo days to be able to just talk about history of how the Bobcat got started. It was late 1956 or sometime in the summer of 56. One of my dad and uncle's customers, Eddie Velo, came to them with a problem of cleaning manure from turkey barns. And then they thought about that for a while, and then they come up with a solution. They came up with something that they thought might be a solution, and then they went out to visit with Eddie about it, and then they all three felt it could be had potential, so they moved forward to build it. And Eddie never agreed to purchase it unless it worked, but he would pay for the materials if it didn't work, and my dad and uncle would forfeit their time if it didn't work. But it was very shortly after it was delivered, early 57, that it was obvious it was going to work. So then and they sent an invoice February 4th of 57, and then Eddie Velo, he paid for it March 7th of 57. And then after that they built 6 more between February of 57 and mid-summer of 58. And during the middle of that summer, one of their uncles, Anton Christensen, introduced them to Les Melro. Anton was already selling Melro products, so he introduced them to Les Melro, and then they showed them the Keller loader, and then the Melros invited them to bring a Keller loader to the 1958 Minnesota State Fair to be on display at the Melro location. The interest at the fair sparked a manufacturing contract right after the fair. Part of the contract was they never did sell their patent. They just awarded Melro exclusive manufacturing rights on a royalty basis, but then part of the contract required Dad and Searle to become Melro employees to develop the loader. So even though the next loader built was a Melro loader, Dad and Searle and 3 other existing employees were given the task to build whatever parts Dad and Searle asked them to build, and that was Don Lloyd, Nels Nelson, and Jim Toyne. So together those 5 built the first loader at Melro. Then they built 5 more, and then Searle, at that point, my uncle Searle took one of those on the road to sell it, just loaded it in the back of a pickup and went on the road to sell it. And then he was in sales the rest of his career. So in a sense, he never came back after he took that first one out. He continued on sales, and Dad continued in the shop, improving and making new models. A lot of the improvements, though, were based on Searle's input from customers. If there was something breaking all the time, then he would call Dad and tell him what was happening, and then Dad, and I'm sure Dad got other people involved to create a fix for that. I wish I knew all those names so I could give him credit, but I don't. So, but there was, after the first 6 machines were built, there's a lot more people became involved, and then it's what you see today. Not many people have the privilege and the honor that I have to be able to share their family's history and have other people know what it is and want to hear more. So I'm just honored to do that, and I know not many people have that privilege and honor, so I'm just not going to waste it. I'll make sure they don't get forgotten, I guess. So the invoice for the first Keller loader was sent out on February 4th, 1957, and it was paid for on March 7th of 57, and I was born on March 4th of 57. So it likely paid for the bill incurred for my delivery. But yeah, so when I was growing up, I took everything for granted. I literally thought that everybody in the world had a Bobcat or 2 whenever they wanted one. I thought everybody had a machine shop in their backyard that they could go make whatever they wanted to with a turning lathe or welders or presses or whatever. But then it took me longer than it should have, but at some point I realized that not very many people have that privilege. And so it was around 1997 when I and my sister Marilyn really got focused on trying to preserve the history. So I've been working on it since 97, so that'd be like 26 years right now. But when I started, I realized that I knew hardly any of it, other than the fact that Dad and Cyril built the first Bobcat. I didn't know much of anything else. I knew a few stories, but compared to what I know now, it really was hardly anything. And then when I started talking about history with Dad and Cyril, then they really weren't that interested in it either. Not that they weren't interested, but everything that they made, when they made something better than previous, they didn't really remember that, or it wasn't important to them anymore. But then when I found the Keller loader that I own, there's only 7 of those, and I found one of them, and it's in perfect condition. So I brought it home, and I invited them over for supper, both of them, but I didn't tell them I had it. And then after supper, I started it up and drove it out of the garage. And it was at that point where they were kind of like a child that found a toy that they had lost for several years. And then they got more interested, and then they started offering information to me instead of me asking them about it. Or like if I'd talk to somebody else and they'd tell me something I didn't know before, then I go talk to Dad and Cyril and say, what do you know about this? Is this true or not? And then they would share the information, but after they saw the Keller loader, then they started telling me stuff without me asking them. So, but it's been 23 years, and luckily I had I did this. I had several goals when I started beyond just recording the history. One was, probably the biggest one was to get it recorded while they were still with us. And then we did a documentary with Prairie Public Television in Fargo, North Dakota. So that documentary is them telling the story, not me telling the story. So to start getting it recorded where they were still here, having a piece of video of them telling their own story, that was done. And then before Dad passed away in 2010, so it was like 13 years of working with him and Cyril. And when by the time he passed away, he knew that we were preserving his history. So that was another goal to make sure they knew it. And then of course I had another 10 years with Cyril, and we continued to talk about stuff. And if there was ever a Bobcat event, I would take Cyril to that whenever I could. And I feel, even though that 18 or that half-hour video, it's got a lot of information, but it still is, out of all the total information with everybody else's stories, with dealer stories, with stories that didn't get part of that video of their own stories, there's at least 80% more to get recorded somewhere. And I've got it recorded, but I don't have it in a fashion that I can publish it. So at some point I need to do that. When they started at Melrose, the first model was an M60, then an M200. And both of those models were what we call the three-wheelers. It was 2 drivers and a caster wheel in the back. They worked really good on hard ground, hard surfaces like a turkey barn, or a bulk fertilizer, or unloading boxcars from coal or whatever. But once you got in any mud or anything, they would not work. And they actually, the poultry market really took a dive in 1960. I don't know the reason why, I've got to find that out. But they couldn't sell a machine. They had built an inventory of 200 M200s, and they weren't selling, and the decision was almost made by the company to stop producing them. But then Dad went out to the shop and he put a second axle on an M200 and took the caster wheel off, put a second axle on there and connected the two axles with a chain. So now it turned it into a four-wheel drive. And that would be, it's that machine and the next one, because that machine wasn't designed like a skid steer is designed today. It had the same weight on the front wheels as on the back wheels, and it wouldn't turn very well. The drive was exposed, and so once you got into the mud or the manure, deeper stuff that you could drive through, then the chains brought that dirt and manure all the way up through the whole system, and it just wouldn't hold up. So then Dad put together what became the 440, and that was the first machine with the 70-30 balance. For the back is 70% of the weight on the axle, and the front is 30% when it's empty, when the bucket's empty. And then it also had enclosed drive chains. That's where the product that's where it just took off. And the product would have survived on its own at that point, if somebody would have made it, even if Melrose chose not to. But of course they didn't. So, but at that point is when everything took off, because now they could enter any market, any construction, any farm, anything. The landscaping, all of those markets opened up when the four-wheel drive came. And and I call the 400, the 400 is the first four-wheel drive, the first skid steer, but the 440 is the first true skid steer where it's got the 70-30 balance and enclosed chains. So that's definitely the turning point. In '99, my niece nominated them for the National Construction Industry Hall of Fame Award. They won that. Then we had the American Society of Agricultural Engineers Landmark Award. They won that. And then there was the Minnesota Inventors Hall of Fame. They won that. We have a museum display of our own. I have helped with another one. So those are active. And then a little over a year ago, or probably close to 2 years ago now, I nominated them for the National Inventors Hall of Fame Award, and they won that. And that ceremony will be in October of '23 in Washington, D.C., and we'll be out there for that. And then they also asked if I would loan them my Keller loader for a display for Dad and Cyril. Yeah, and I said sure. And then I made a road trip out of it, and I pulled that out all the way from North Dakota to Alexandria, Virginia, but it's right by Washington, D.C. I pulled that all the way out there, and I stopped at as many Bobcat dealers as I could on the way out. And that was amazing. That was fun. And there again, I wish people could have the same feeling I have when you, in this case, pull into a dealer and they're waiting for you, and they come out and they can't believe that you took the time to stop for them, and they're taking pictures, and they're getting on the machine and taking pictures, and yeah, that was really good. And then I've always thought the history was worth saving or worth recording. If Cyril was here, if he was here today, he'd be on every one of these machines already. So he was a salesman, and he'd have been and demonstrating these machines today if he was here. And Dad he'd feel the same way too. He might be more interested in how they made something. Cyril would be interested in talking to the customers, but he would also know how they made it. They were both good at mechanics, but yeah, they'd be very impressed. They made it before Dad passed away. They had the $750,000 celebration. I believe that was in 2008. So he saw it expand to that point. Cyril made it to 2020, and he was at the 1 million celebration. So he saw it expand to that point, but Cyril would have saw a little bit more, but neither one of them would have saw how that little Bobcat name that was introduced early in the production has spread into so many different products, as well as the name that they came up with is what people refer to the company as, and all these other products. So they would have felt great.
We made the manure bucket on the first one out of 5/8 rod because we only had a 6-horse motor in there and we didn't have a lot of push power. We knew if we make too big a teeth, it would be hard to push in, so we made them out of 5/8 rod. Well, when we went to tear this manure loose, one would bend one way and one the other was just all bent up, so we brought it back into the shop and we were taking them rods out, and then the police there in town, they come in here, he's looking to see what we're doing, and he looked at them and he says, "Let me go get some rods." He says, "I don't think they'll bend," and he took off. And when he come back, he had the bars out of the old jail. And you couldn't saw them. We had to grind them, cut them off. We had to grind them off to length, and we put them in, and they're still in there today.